In today's gospel reading, the theme of preparedness is continued, or we are reminded once again of the need to prepare because we know not when the bridegroom will come. In other words, when Christ returns at the end of time. But we also know not when our own death is going to occur, so the importance of being properly prepared. Now notice in this parable of the 10 bridesmaids, 5 of them were foolish and 5 of them were wise. And basically what our Lord is pointing out to us is that there are 2 views or 2 kind of attitudes or 2 kinds of people in this regard that will, in a sense, be either let into the wedding banquet or prevented from entering in. So when we think of this parable, we would think, okay, well, they all have their lamps, but some of them didn't bring enough oil or didn't bring any oil with them. So what is the symbolism of the lamp? What is the symbolism of the oil? We want to make sure that in our own lives, we have plenty of oil, and that's good. So we need to consider this. So the church fathers, when they comment on this passage, they point out that the lamps represent faith. So they all have faith. And St. James tells us that it is through faith that we are saved. But he also tells us that faith without works is dead. So in other words, there are some people who claim to be believers, but they're not really practicing their faith. They may not be going to church. They may not be saying their prayers. They may not be performing good works. When it comes to the oil for the lamp, the church fathers point out that the oil represents the works. In other words, the manifestation of faith in an individual's life. And often when we think of works, we would just automatically think of, good deeds, helping the poor and the less fortunate. And that is part of it, yes, absolutely. But it's also putting faith into action. You see, the reality is that when we put faith into action, our faith grows. Our faith becomes stronger. If somebody claims they have faith, but they don't really practice it, what level of faith do they really have? We can question that, right? So in other words, people who don't put their faith into action are much more likely to lose their faith and to be prevented from entering in. Recall that passage where our Lord says, do not just be hearers of the word, but be doers of the word. In other words, we must put faith into action. And of course, those of us who come to church regularly, those of us who say our prayers regularly, yes, we are putting our faith into action. But there's probably more that we need to do. In other words, do we really believe in heaven and hell? Do we really believe in judgment? If we did, then we would make a good, thorough examination of conscience, root out all our sinful inclinations, make the effort to grow in virtue and goodness, especially in the virtue of charity. So if we truly believe, we would be doing all these things. And it's also, the reality that we don't know when our Lord will return. We don't know when our lives are going to end. Some of us are older. Sometimes young people die. Sometimes very young people die. So we have no idea how much time we have left. So this oil is doing the works, but also developing the habit. In other words, having the habit of faith, having the habit of manifesting our faith to others. One of the areas in our lives when our faith really isn't able to grow is when there's persecution. So in other words, are we willing to maintain our faith even though there may be public opposition to us or general opposition or persecution? Imagine if we were arrested because we were believers, or imagine if we were tortured or killed or had our throat slit because we were Christians. Would we persevere in those kinds of situations? In other words, to be able to persevere in those kind of situations, we need to have great faith. We need to have a very strong faith. And the ability to have such strong faith comes from the fact that we've endured little persecutions that have strengthened us in the area of our faith. So this is what happens when we put our faith into action. We grow in faith. It's kind of like a muscle. So what our Lord is saying, if your muscle is not strong, you won't be able to do what you need to do. So we strengthen our spiritual muscles by practicing our faith, by being regular about our life of prayer, self-denial, spiritual reading, all these other things that nourish our life of faith. Today is the feast of Saint Monica, and as you know, she was the mother of Saint Augustine, and she's especially known for the fact that she persevered in her prayers for the conversion of her son, Saint Augustine, and also for her husband, Patricius. So he was a pagan, and he was converted. I think he converted very close to his death. Saint Augustine, of course, converted earlier, after quite some time, but he was still quite young when he converted, and he not only became a Catholic, but he became a priest, he became a bishop, and he became a very great saint, wrote extensively on the faith. He was extremely intelligent. And it's interesting when we consider the life of Saint Augustine, we see in every age that young people tend to rebel against their parents. Young people tend to think they know more than their parents do. They think they're just so much wiser. I think this was also true of Saint Augustine. He was quite intelligent, and his parents made all kinds of sacrifices to enable him to get a good education, but he sought wisdom apart from the Catholic faith. He thought that his mother's faith was just kind of, something for old women. So he sought philosophy, and he kind of joined the Manichees, different religious beliefs or different sects. And it was only when he went to Milan and he heard St. Ambrose speaking, he was very captivated by St. Ambrose, but he noticed that St. Ambrose, he didn't speak in the oratorical style of great intellects, the lawyers and all these great orators, but rather he spoke very simply in such a way that everyone could understand, and yet what he was saying was very profound, very deep. And this is what kind of got St. Augustine to start thinking, and eventually he was converted. So a lot of it is due to the prayers and tears of his mother, Saint Monica, who we celebrate today. And when Augustine he tried to get away from his mother. So his mother kept going after him. No matter where he would go, when he went to Milan, she would follow him. So he tried to get away from her, but she followed him and persisted in her prayers and just had great faith in God that eventually her son would be converted. And so St. Monica is an example for all of us, because I'm sure probably in most of our lives there's somebody, a family member or someone who's away from the faith, or not living their lives the way that they should be. And when we think of the saints are kind of like manifestations to us of some aspect of Christ. So in other words, Christ becomes very much present in the lives of the saints, and different saints, certain aspects are emphasized more so than others. For example, Saint Francis of Assisi, poverty, right? There were other saints where it was humility, other saints where it was service of the poor. So in the case of Saint Monica, what I wanted to draw your attention to is this perseverance of Saint Monica in praying for her son and trying to bring about his conversion. And in many ways, it's a symbol to us, or a reminder to us, of how God is always searching for us. We try to run away from God, or sometimes young people try to run away from God to seek their happiness apart from God. But God is always coming after them. God is always giving them his grace. God is always trying to enlighten them. God is always putting people in their lives that hopefully they will listen to and hopefully eventually convert. And this is important for us to realize, because God desires the salvation of every human being. And so God is giving them graces. God is putting people in their lives. God is revealing things to them. And we don't know when their conversion may come about. It's not absolutely guaranteed that they will convert. But the important thing is that we don't lose hope, and that we keep praying. Because remember the message of Our Lady of Fatima. She said that many souls go to hell simply because there is no one to pray for them. So in other words, our prayers are extremely powerful. The example of St. Monica reminds us of this. Our prayers can be extremely powerful. So do not lose hope in hoping for the conversion of your loved ones. Do not hope in God. God is reaching out. God is trying to call them. Yes, they must respond to God's grace, and it's a free choice. They may or may not, but we must have great hope and trust in the power and efficacy of the prayers that we offer up, but also the sacrifices that we make for them. So in other words, when we join sacrifice to prayer, our prayers are even more effective. So some form of self-denial. For St. Monica to follow her son, she had to deny herself. She had to leave her comfort, the comfort of her own home, wherever she lived, go to a strange land. When she went to Milan, Bishop Ambrose had to kind of correct her because some of the customs in Milan were different from where she had come from. So we make sacrifices, and this is a sign of our love, and it adds to the efficacy and power of our prayers.